After 20 years of marriage, Calla didn't scream. She printed a photo. That alone is what makes this story unsettling. We expect noise when something breaks. Raised voices slam doors, words hurled in panic. Silence disrupts that expectation. It holds the room hostage. It forces attention. Calla's quiet wasn't confusion or delay. It was recognition. The kind that settles instantly, without drama, without denial. A moment where emotion doesn't spill, it hardens into resolve. She didn't react because she understood something most people don't until it's too late. Reacting too soon hands away power. Silence, in moments like this, isn't emptiness. It's control. What would you do if proof sat quietly on your kitchen counter? Not proof that arrives with an explanation. Not something delivered by a shaking voice or a guilty confession. Just proof that exists. Uninvited, undeniable, waiting. Would you confront it immediately? Would you demand answers before your thoughts catch up? Or would you sit with it long enough to understand what it means for your future, not just your feelings? Most people believe truth demands urgency. Calla didn't. She understood that truth doesn't disappear if you pause. It only becomes clearer. And clarity, when handled carefully, can be far more dangerous than anger. The photo didn't arrive as a confession. It wasn't sent, leaked, or explained away. It simply appeared, misplaced inside a shared cloud folder where it didn't belong. One wrong click while preparing to print their son's graduation picture, and there it was. A hospital room. Braden, in blue scrubs, cradling a newborn with practiced ease. Not stiff, not hesitant. Comfortable, natural, like a man who'd done this before and wanted to. Beside him stood a woman, not in uniform, not a nurse. Her body leaned toward his, like gravity had a preference. Her hand rested lightly on his elbow. Intimate, familiar. And there, at the bottom corner, was a timestamp. The same weekend Braden told Calla he was in Dubai finalizing a real estate deal. There was no ambiguity to wrestle with, no context to hunt down. The image spoke clearly, without urgency or apology. And Calla understood something instantly. This wasn't a mistake she needed to solve. It was a reality she needed to decide how to use. So why didn't she confront him right then? Why didn't she demand an explanation while the evidence was still warm in her hands? Because Calla understood something that most people learn too late. Timing matters more than truth. Speaking too soon would give him control of the narrative. Silence kept it with her. She didn't need him to explain. She needed him comfortable. She needed him certain he was still winning. Because the choice to wait wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. And that single decision, made in absolute quiet, shaped every move that followed. This isn't a story about shouting, smashed plates, or dramatic exits. It's about what happens when a woman chooses restraint over reaction, and how that restraint becomes leverage. Calla didn't confront her husband immediately, and that choice rewrote the balance of power in ways he never anticipated. What followed wasn't chaos, it was calculation, quiet moves, careful timing, and consequences that arrived only after he believed he was safe. If you're drawn to stories where silence is louder than rage, subscribe to Midnight Story Vault. The house was unusually quiet that evening, the kind of quiet that feels deliberate rather than peaceful. No television murmuring from another room, no footsteps overhead, just the soft, measured ticking of the clock above the kitchen doorway, marking time with indifferent precision. Outside, dusk settled slowly, light thinning through the windows until the walls softened into muted tones of grey and blue. Calla stood alone at the counter, hands resting flat against the cool surface, staring at nothing in particular. The kettle had already cooled beside the sink. The tea she'd made earlier sat untouched, a faint curl of steam long gone. She noticed these details without reacting to them, as though her mind had shifted into a place where observation mattered more than comfort. She had always liked order, clean lines, predictability. That preference had shaped her marriage, her career, the way she moved through rooms without drawing attention to herself. Tonight, that instinct sharpened. She straightened a placemat that didn't need fixing, aligned a chair that was already tucked in, anything to keep her hands busy while her thoughts remained exact. The clock ticked again, and again. This was the space between knowing and acting, the narrow stretch where choices formed quietly. Calla didn't pace. She didn't sit down. She waited, steady and upright, listening to the house hold its breath with her. Whatever came next would arrive through that front door, and she intended to be ready for it, without a single unnecessary movement. The first instinct had been to close the window. One click would have done it. The image could have vanished from the screen, dismissed as an intrusion she never asked for. Deleting it would have been easy, clean, final, and useless. Calla understood that erasing evidence doesn't erase truth. It only erases options. She printed the photo because paper holds weight in a way screens never do. Paper can be folded, filed, produced without warning. Paper doesn't glitch or disappear behind passwords. It exists whether someone is ready to face it or not. Printing the photo wasn't emotional. It was practical. A decision made with the part of her that had learned long ago to prepare before reacting. The envelope came next. Plain, white, unmarked. She chose it deliberately. No name, no message, no explanation written on the front to soften what was inside. Anything decorative would have diluted the moment. Anything labeled would have given him time to brace. The envelope needed to look harmless, forgettable, like mail that could wait. The kind of envelope someone might mistake for a utility bill. That was the trap. That was the point. She slid the photo inside and folded the flap carefully, smoothing it once with her thumb. The gesture felt precise, almost ceremonial. Not because she was angry, but because she was done pretending that clarity required chaos. She wasn't trying to catch him off guard. She was trying to free herself from wondering. The envelope wasn't an invitation to argue. It wasn't a demand. It was proof, sealed and patient. And by leaving it untouched on the counter, Calla ensured one thing above. All else, when he saw it, he would understand that she had time. And that time, not fury, was what made this dangerous. The front door opened at exactly 7:24 p.m. Calla didn't turn. She recognized his timing the way some people recognize footsteps. Consistent, predictable. Braden entered, still tethered to his call, voice firm, confident, speaking as though nothing inside this house had shifted. Close by month end or we walk, period. Yeah, I'll call you back. The call ended. Shoes by the door. Keys placed where they always went. Routine moved ahead of truth, unaware it was about to stall. Hey babe, he said easily. I sent that wire to the school fund. Remind me, do they need a tax form too? Calla finally looked up and nodded toward the kitchen island. The envelope waited between them, plain and unobtrusive. Before that, she said, calm and level, open the envelope. He frowned slightly, irritation flickering across his face. What's this? Something I didn't ask for, she replied, but needed to see. He slid the photo out. The change was immediate. His posture stiffened. Color drained from his face, not in confusion, but recognition. He didn't look confused, just quiet, like someone who had hoped a lie could outrun reality. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't laugh. He didn't reach for an explanation. Where'd you get this? He finally asked. Cloud sync error, Calla said. Guess your mistress doesn't know how to use folders. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. The room held the silence without rushing it. No follow-up questions. No raised voices. No movement at all. That's when she knew. It wasn't the photo that ended them. It was his silence. The silence from the kitchen followed them into the hallway. Braden shifted his weight, as if movement might somehow restart the conversation on his terms. Calla didn't move. She stayed exactly where she was, letting the quiet stretch until it wasn't silence anymore, but discomfort shaped like stillness. You're not saying anything, he offered finally, a smile flickering and dying at the corners. Can we at least talk about this? She turned her gaze to him, not sharply, not accusing, just steady, like she did in meetings when someone slipped and said more than they meant to. I'm listening, she replied, and just like that, Something inside her unspooled. Not rage, not even grief, memory. Little things. Things she'd folded away to keep the peace. The unanswered calls. The business trips extended without explanation. The way his eyes would glaze halfway through dinner conversations, then refocus like nothing had happened. The times he'd laughed a little too quickly when she asked something real. She remembered standing in doorways, watching him knot his tie, wondering if she was paranoid, wondering if asking too many questions made her difficult. Once she'd asked him lightly, "Do you ever feel like we talk past each other?" He'd kissed her forehead and said, "You overthink things. We're solid." So she let it go. She'd chosen peace over persistence, trust over discomfort, again and again. But now, with that photo burned into her mind, and the envelope sitting on the kitchen island like a courtroom exhibit, all those moments didn't feel like paranoia. They felt like breadcrumbs, not regrets, evidence, training. She'd learned how to be quiet, how to watch, how to catalogue the pattern without disrupting it. Braden took a step closer. "Say something, Calla." She met his eyes. "I am. Just not in the way you're used to." He blinked, the floor beneath him beginning to shift. He tried again, lowering his voice, softening his tone, like he did in boardrooms when tension flared. "Calla, come on, let's slow down. You're jumping to conclusions before I've had a chance to explain." She tilted her head. "You've had chances. You just used them to stall." "That's not fair," he snapped, voice brittle. "I'm not asking for fairness," she said. "I'm asking for accuracy." The sentence sliced through the air like glass. She stepped forward, not to threaten, but to rebalance. "You want this to be an argument," she added, "because arguments can be negotiated." Braden narrowed his eyes. "Then, what is this?" "A reckoning," she said simply. "And those don't require your permission." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since he'd walked through that door, Braden had no script. His usual tools, charm, reassurance, dismissal, just hung in the air, useless. "You're acting like this is already decided." "It is," Calla said, "just not publicly. Yet." The word landed like a closing door. She turned her back, not in anger, not in haste, but with finality. No slammed doors, no dramatic exit, just a shift in gravitational pull. Braden stood still, watching her walk away, not out of the house, but out of the lie they'd lived. And something in his face changed, not guilt, not fury. Recognition. He wasn't steering this anymore. He was reacting to her. And for the first time in years, Calla was the one setting the pace. The house felt different the next morning, not heavier, quieter, in a way that allowed thought. Braden had left early, offering a careful goodbye that Calla neither returned nor refused. The door closed. The sound settled. And with it came clarity. She didn't cry. She didn't pace. She didn't reread the text or wonder what the other woman looked like. That phase had already burned itself out the night before. Now, there was space, and silence, and intention. She opened her laptop at the dining table, sunlight cutting clean lines across the surface. No rush, no shaking hands. What remained of heartbreak had already turned to ash. What replaced it was focus. Calla titled the first document simply, "Assets in My Name." This list mattered because it was immovable. Accounts she'd opened before marriage, property transferred intentionally, consulting income routed through structures she alone controlled. Legally, this list established independence. It drew a boundary no apology could cross, and no explanation could soften. She murmured the items under her breath as she typed, grounding herself in facts. Savings, retirement, consulting fees. Her phone buzzed once. A text from Braden, "We'll talk later." She didn't respond. Assets in her name weren't about escape. They were about certainty, about ensuring that no narrative, no matter how polished, could erase her standing. Courts respect documentation more than emotion. Calla knew that. She'd advised clients the same way for years. When she finished, She saved the file and closed it carefully. One list down, 2 more to go. By late morning, Calla poured herself a second cup of coffee and opened a new document. The title came without hesitation: Joint Investments. This list required more attention. It wasn't about what belonged to her alone. It was about what would eventually need to be divided, valued, explained. She scrolled through records she already knew by memory. Properties purchased during the marriage, accounts tied to Braden's firms, funds labeled for growth, expansion, or future planning. Each entry carried a date, a signature, a purpose. Emotion had no place here. Precision did. The shift surprised her, not because it was sudden, but because it was complete. The ache she'd expected never arrived. Instead, there was a steady calm that came from treating the situation as a problem to solve, rather than a wound to tend. Heartbreak asks questions that never end. Precision asks questions with answers. She whispered to herself as she worked: equal contribution, shared liability, words that mattered in courtrooms, not kitchens. Her phone rang. Braden's name flashed on the screen. She let it ring once, twice, then sent it to voicemail. This work demanded uninterrupted thought. Joint investments defined the center of the marriage, the space neither of them could pretend didn't exist. Listing them wasn't an act of hostility, it was preparation, because when the time came, clarity would matter more than sentiment, and Calla intended to have plenty of it. The third document came last, though it carried the most weight. Calla labeled it receipts, then paused, fingers resting on the keys. This list wasn't about ownership. It was about patterns. She gathered expense reports that didn't match travel schedules, transfers that made sense only when placed beside dates she now understood, inconsistencies that no longer looked accidental once aligned. Each entry was factual, verifiable, quietly persuasive. When she finished, she picked up her phone and made one call. The woman who answered introduced herself by first name only, voice steady and unhurried. A family attorney, recommended by Miri, known for discretion. "I was told you're careful," Calla said. "I am," the lawyer replied. "And I listen." That mattered. Calla didn't want reassurance or outrage. She wanted clarity, a woman who understood how easily calm gets misread as weakness, who knew how often composure is mistaken for consent, a lawyer who wouldn't rush her into spectacle, who would protect her without dramatizing her life. "We can meet Thursday," the lawyer said. "Bring documentation." Nothing more. Calla agreed and ended the call without small talk. Choosing a female attorney wasn't symbolic. It was practical. She needed someone who recognized restraint as strength, not indecision. Someone who would respect her timing. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about safeguarding the future, with someone who understood exactly what was at stake. By afternoon, the house had settled into a steady hush. Calla closed the last document and leaned back, eyes resting on the ceiling for a moment longer than necessary. There was one thing left, small but essential. She opened her email and typed her son's name. To Eli Winter, subject, checking in. Her fingers slowed, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she knew what not to say. "Everything's fine. Just preparing for a storm. Nothing you need to worry about. Focus on school. I love you." She read it twice. Then, once more. This wasn't secrecy. It was protection. Eli didn't need details yet. He needed steadiness. A mother who sounded like herself. Someone who could hold the ground beneath him, while everything else shifted quietly out of place. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. "Love you too, Mom. Call me later." "Soon," she said aloud, though no one was there to hear it. She sent the message and closed the laptop. The lists were finished. The groundwork laid. Whatever came next would arrive on her terms, not through panic, not through noise. Preparation wasn't cold. It was care, practiced carefully. Because in the quiet, she wasn't collapsing. She was preparing. Like this video, if you believe preparation is power. By the following afternoon, Calla's phone began to fill with reminders she hadn't set. Calendar alerts, group emails, Parent committee updates marked urgent. The school fundraiser, Braden's fundraiser, was moving ahead as planned. Braden Crest was known there, not casually, not quietly. He was the sponsor whose name opened doors, the parent whose presence reassured donors. In newsletters, he was described as deeply involved. In speeches, as committed to family and community. Photos from past events showed him smiling beside Calla, one hand resting lightly at her back, their son once between them, younger then. At pickup meetings, people greeted him warmly. Lucky kids, having a dad like that, one parent had said months earlier. Braden had laughed. I just try to show up. Calla remembered standing beside him during those moments, nodding, letting the praise pass through her as if it belonged to both of them equally. She understood now that his image wasn't accidental. It was curated, maintained, fed carefully over time. Her phone buzzed with a message from the PTA chair. We're finalizing gala roles today, still confirming sponsors. Calla set the phone down and exhaled slowly. This wasn't just an event. It was the stage where Braden's reputation lived. And reputations like his didn't exist in private. They survived on witnesses. She picked the phone back up, already understanding what this chapter of the story would require. For a brief moment, the option presented itself clearly: withdraw, send a polite message, claim a scheduling conflict. No one would question it. People would offer sympathy in lowered voices and move on. Calla considered it and dismissed it just as quickly. Cancelling would frame her as reactive, emotional, unsteady. It would invite questions she wasn't ready to answer and give Braden space to define the story before it reached daylight. Absence, in this case, would speak louder than truth, and not in her favor. Her phone rang. Braden's name lit the screen. "Hey," he said, voice careful. "The school's checking final numbers. You're still good to help co-chair, right?" She let a beat pass. "Of course," she replied. "Why wouldn't I be?" Relief slipped into his tone. "Just wanted to make sure. It'll look good, us doing this together." That was exactly why she stayed. Calla ended the call and opened the event agenda again. Seating charts, speaker lists, sponsor acknowledgements, all the visible markers of respectability. This wasn't about endurance. It was about placement. Public truth, she understood, required a public setting. You don't dismantle an image in private. You let it collapse where it was built. She typed a short reply to the PTA chair, happy to co-chair. "Let me know where I'm most useful." Then she closed the app, already committed. Staying wasn't denial. It was positioning. And Calla had always known how to position herself when it mattered most. That evening, Calla reviewed the gala materials one more time, not for details, but for sightlines. Who would be on stage? Who would be seated up front? Which donors would be introduced by name? The order of speeches mattered. The pauses mattered more. Braden walked past the doorway, jacket draped over his arm. "They're expecting a big turnout," he said casually. "Press 2. She looked up. "For a school fundraiser?" He shrugged. "It's a good cause, and the firm's backing it. People like to be seen supporting that." She nodded, making a note she didn't write down. People like to be seen. Later, a brief call came from the event coordinator, cheerful and efficient. "We'll list both of you as honorees," the woman said. "It reads better. Family commitment, community values, that kind of thing." "That's fine," Calla replied evenly. "Send the draft when it's ready." When the call ended, she sat quietly, hands folded, understanding the shape of what was forming. Truth, she had learned, doesn't travel well in whispers. It needs space, witnesses, a setting where denial looks small and explanations feel thin. She didn't plan a scene. She planned a moment, one that would make revision impossible. From the hallway, Braden called, "Everything okay?" "Yes," Calla said, closing the folder. "Everything's set." And it was, not because she intended to speak soon, but because when she did, it would be somewhere the truth could stand on its own. The question came 2 nights later, after the last planning call ended and the house returned to its evening rhythm. Seating charts were finalized. The program draft had been approved. Everything looked settled, too settled. Calla waited until dinner, until the conversation drifted into familiar territory. Braden spoke about schedules, about travel, about the usual small inconveniences that filled space without meaning. She listened, nodding at the right moments, letting him believe the calm had returned. Then she asked, lightly, "What hotel was that investor brunch at again? I want to send them a thank you basket." She didn't look at him when she said it. She reached for her water, the tone of the question casual enough to feel almost considerate. Braden answered immediately. The Fairmont. Too fast. No pause. No checking. No curiosity about why she wanted to send anything at all. Calla's hands stilled around the glass. He had told her months ago it was the Carlton. She remembered because she'd asked whether the location made sense for the meeting. She remembered because he'd joked about the view. Details lodged quietly, the way useful things do. "Oh," she said, calm. "Downtown?" "Yeah," he replied, already moving on. "Close to the offices. Wrong city." Again, she nodded, offering nothing more. This wasn't about hotels, or memory, or confusion. The big lies had weight. They required maintenance. They could be explained away with effort and emotion. This one didn't. This one cost him nothing to tell correctly. That's why it mattered. Because a lie told without pressure reveals habit, not fear. It shows how easily someone rewrites reality when they think no one is watching. And as Braden continued speaking, unaware of the quiet shift across the table, Calla understood that this wasn't carelessness. It was reflex. Calla didn't correct him. She didn't lift her head or narrow her eyes or ask him to repeat himself. She let the answer sit between them, unchallenged, the way you let something reveal its shape before you decide what to do with it. Braden kept talking, about the menu, about a client who'd complained unnecessarily, about how exhausting it was to keep everyone satisfied. His voice carried the ease of someone who believed the moment had passed without consequence. That was when it settled. He wasn't lying to protect himself. He wasn't lying to avoid conflict or soften a truth. He was lying because lying had become natural, automatic, a default response, even when accuracy would have cost him nothing at all. Calla watched him from across the table, noticing how comfortable he was inside the version of reality he created on the spot. How little effort it took. How little awareness. This wasn't the careful deception of someone afraid of being caught. It was the ease of someone who hadn't been challenged in a long time. She set her glass down. "I'll handle the basket tomorrow," she said, her tone steady. "Great," Braden replied, relieved. "Let me know if you need the contact." "I won't," she said. The certainty in her voice didn't register with him. He smiled, returned to his meal, already convinced the conversation had gone exactly as he intended. But Calla had crossed a line internally, one she wouldn't step back from. The big lies explained betrayal. This one explained character. It told her that even if the affair had never existed, the structure underneath their marriage was built on something unreliable. And that realization did something final. She no longer wondered whether he would tell the truth if pressed. She knew he wouldn't, because truth, to him, was optional. And once you see that clearly, there's no argument left to have. Only decisions. Dinner. The following night arrived without ceremony. The question about the hotel had passed without friction, and Braden moved through the house with the quiet confidence of someone who believed the tension had dissolved. He poured wine, set the table, lit the candle Calla usually saved for anniversaries. "There," he said lightly, striking the match. "Feels nice to sit down properly again." The flame steadied after a brief flicker, casting a warm glow across the table. Calla watched it closely, noting how controlled the light was, contained, deliberate, easy to mistake for comfort. Candles had always meant pause in their home, a signal to slow down, to soften. "You remembered this one," she said. Braden smiled. "Of course I did. You like it." She did. Or had. The candle wasn't romance tonight, it was presentation, an attempt to restore normalcy through familiar gestures. Braden sat back, satisfied, as though the act itself proved something had been repaired. Feels like we're back on track, he added. The fundraisers sorted, work's calming down. Good sign, right? Calla didn't answer immediately. She folded her napkin with care, eyes still on the flame. Candles don't erase what came before them. They simply make the room easier to look at. Yes, she said at last. It's calm. He nodded, relief visible. The candle burned evenly between them, quiet and contained, much like the moment he believed he'd recovered. Braden lifted his glass. You know, he said, casual but pleased with himself, this gala's going to be a big one. The firm's name, the school, the donors, it all ties together. It's the kind of thing people remember. Calla met his gaze. They remember what they're shown, she replied. He laughed softly. That's reputation. You build it carefully. Protect it. She nodded once. Reputation is what people repeat, she said. Legacy is what remains when no one's repeating anything. The difference wasn't lost on her. Reputation relied on visibility, on photos, programs, introductions. Legacy relied on consistency, truth over time. One survived applause, the other survived silence. Braden waved a hand. End of the day, it's the same thing. It isn't, Calla said gently. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. I think we're doing all right, he said. Look at us. Dinner. No tension. That's progress. She took a sip of water, unhurried. Progress depends on direction. Forward, he answered quickly. Always forward. Calla glanced at the candle again, the flame steady, predictable. Reputation loved settings like this, controlled, flattering, warm. Legacy didn't need lighting. You've always thought in big terms, Braden added. That's what I admire about you. She smiled, not because she agreed, but because he still believed admiration could smooth over difference. He mistook calm for alignment, and familiarity for forgiveness. And in that mistake, he revealed exactly how much he misunderstood what was happening at the table. Braden relaxed into his chair, shoulders easing as the meal went on. The conversation drifted to logistics, guest counts, parking, a minor scheduling hiccup with the program. Ordinary things, safe things. He spoke with the comfort of someone who believed the hardest part had already been survived. You know, he said, almost amused, I was worried for a minute there. Thought things might get messy. Calla set her fork down. Why? He smiled, a touch self-satisfied. Because when people get emotional, they make mistakes. But we're good. We're handling this like adults. The irony settled quietly between them. He believed restraint meant resolution. That calm was proof of closure rather than a pause before action. He mistook her composure for agreement, her presence for acceptance. She studied him then, not with disappointment, but with clarity. This was the moment he felt safest. The moment he'd remember later and wonder how he missed the signs. Do you feel better? She asked. Yeah, he said easily. Honestly, I do. She nodded, as if considering that. The candle burned steadily, its light unchanged, revealing nothing of what it hid. Good, Calla said. He lifted his glass again. To moving past things, she didn't raise hers. Instead, she looked at the flame one last time, then back at him, voice even and unmistakably calm. Let's test that. The gala followed the candlelight dinner the way night follows a held breath. They arrived just after dusk, the entrance already crowded with cars pulling up in smooth succession. Valets moved with practiced efficiency. Lenses flashed as donors stepped onto the carpet, names announced softly but clearly by a coordinator near the doors. Braden straightened his jacket as they exited the car. Big turnout, he said, scanning the crowd with approval. This is good. Calla stepped beside him, posture steady, gaze forward. The building glowed from within, light spilling out through tall windows, carrying the low hum of conversation and the rise and fall of applause as someone inside finished a speech. Inside, the room opened wide, tables dressed in white, place cards, aligned with care, sponsors listed on tall panels along the walls, donors clustered in small circles, glasses in hand, laughter punctuating the air. A photographer paused them near the entrance. "Together, please," the photographer said. Braden's hand found Callah's back, light and familiar. "Smile," he murmured. She did, not because she felt compelled, because this was part of the setting. Applause broke out near the stage as another honoree was introduced. Heads turned. The energy swelled and settled again, like a tide. They moved through the room, greeting names Callah recognized. Board members, parents, benefactors. "Such a beautiful event," one woman said warmly. "Couldn't happen without community," Braden replied. Callah nodded, adding softly, "It's important to show up." They reached their table near the front, close enough to the stage to see every expression clearly. Braden checked the program, satisfied. Callah placed her clutch beside her chair and sat, composed. She had arrived. She would wait. Callah's gown caught attention without asking for it. The color wasn't chosen in haste or anger. It wasn't dramatic for the sake of display. Crimson was deliberate, measured, a shade that held its ground under bright lights and refused to fade into the background of white linens and black suits. As she moved through the room, heads turned. Not abruptly, not with surprise, with recognition. A woman from the parent council leaned in. "You look stunning," she said, eyes lingering. "That color suits you." "Thank you," Callah replied, offering a brief smile. Crimson had always meant presence to her, not defiance, not danger. Presence, the kind that doesn't apologize for taking up space. Against the neutral tones of the room, it made her impossible to overlook, and impossible to misplace later. Braden noticed the attention too. He glanced at her more than once, pride evident. "You're stealing my spotlight tonight," he said lightly. She met his gaze. "That's never been a competition." He laughed, reassured. "I mean it as a compliment." She let the comment pass. The gown wasn't for him. It wasn't for the crowd either. It was a marker, a visual anchor for a moment that would soon need one. From the stage, the host's voice rose again, welcoming guests, acknowledging sponsors. Applause followed each name. Braden's came with enthusiasm. He stood briefly, nodding in thanks. Callah remained seated, hands folded neatly in her lap. The fabric of the gown settled around her, unwrinkled, steady. She felt no rush, no tremor. The color did its work without effort. Whatever came next would be remembered. And when it was, she would not be mistaken for part of the background. The program moved forward with practiced rhythm. Announcements, acknowledgements, brief speeches punctuated by applause that rose and fell on cue. Callah followed each transition without looking at the page, aware of timing. The way one becomes aware of breathing, present, controlled, unremarkable. Braden was introduced midway through the evening. He stood when his name was called, smoothing his jacket as the room responded. Applause gathered quickly, confident and approving. He smiled, accepting it as something earned and familiar. Callah remained seated. From her place near the front, she could see everything clearly, the camera shifting to frame. Him just right, the donors leaning forward, the host stepping aside to give him space. She noticed the small details others missed, the way Braden squared his shoulders before reaching. The stage, the brief glance he cast toward her as if to confirm she was still there. She was calm, breathing steady, hands loose, no tightness in her chest. The calm surprised her only in its completeness. Callah had expected adrenaline, maybe a pulse of panic, but none came. Waiting felt natural now. Waiting had become familiar. Braden began his speech, voice polished, cadence practiced. He thanked the sponsors, praised the school, spoke about legacy, vision, shared values. Every sentence landed where it should, met with nods and quiet applause. Callah didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. The moment she'd planned for didn't demand urgency. It required precision, alignment. And as Braden's speech neared its close, that alignment settled into place. The host returned to the stage, smiling. "Before we continue," she said, "we'd like to—" Callah rose. Chairs shifted, heads turned. The room adjusted, curious, not yet alarmed. She stepped forward with unhurried grace, her gown moving like liquid against the polished floor. The host faltered, smile dimming, and stepped aside without prompting. Calla reached the edge of the stage, climbed the steps, and took the microphone in one fluid motion. A hush fell, not forced, just inevitable. She didn't look at Braden. She didn't scan the crowd. She stood still. "This program," she said, holding it between two fingers, "lists me as Braden Crest's wife." A ripple of polite laughter swept the room. Nervous, expecting a toast. "That was accurate," she said, voice even. "Until last Friday." The laughter died instantly. "I'm not here for pity," she continued. "I'm not here for revenge." Pause. "I'm here because silence is often mistaken for strength." The room shifted. Not physically, but emotionally. A collective inhale. Stillness. After 20 years of marriage, I learned the difference between privacy and secrecy. Another pause. No one moved. Last weekend, while I was told my husband was overseas on business, I found proof he was somewhere else. Her voice didn't tremble. He was in a hospital. Beat. Holding a newborn. Gasps. Still muted, but felt. "The child wasn't ours," Calla said softly, "and the woman beside him wasn't a nurse." Braden stood, stunned. "Calla." She didn't look at him. "I came up here to say it out loud," she said, lifting her eyes now to the crowd. "Because too many women are taught that endurance is noble, that if you're quiet long enough, things fix themselves." The host remained frozen to the side, hands clasped, eyes wide. Braden stood silently, rooted but crumbling. Calla continued, "Tonight's theme is commitment, a quiet, bitter smile. So let's raise a glass to the kind that's honest, to the kind that doesn't demand someone erase themselves to preserve a man's image." Pause. She set the microphone gently on the stand, straightened it, took one final look at the room that had once applauded their perfect marriage, then stepped away. No applause followed. What came instead was silence. Powerful, intentional, respectful. She descended the stage, shoulders high, steps measured, her dignity intact. At the exit, she paused, not to hesitate, to finish. He had once walked into her life with everything. Now she walked away with what he could never reclaim. Dignity. And he was left holding nothing. By morning, the moment no longer belonged to the room where it happened. It lived everywhere else. Clips from the gala appeared online in fragments. 30 seconds here, a single sentence there. The angle changed with each upload, but the stillness remained unmistakable. Headlines didn't need embellishment. They repeated her words as they were spoken. Calm, clear, final. "I don't need revenge. I just needed to say it, so no other woman thinks silence is strength." That line became the caption. The video went viral. 3 million views by sunrise. Community commitment turned into a meme by noon. Calla watched none of it. She woke early, as she always had, and moved through her routine without interruption. Coffee, a quiet walk. Her phone stayed face down on the counter, vibrating occasionally with notifications she didn't acknowledge. Across the city, Braden's morning looked very different. "Pull it down," he said sharply into his phone. "All of it." Now, a pause. "What do you mean it's already everywhere?" He paced the length of his office, jacket abandoned on the chair, tie loosened. Messages stacked up faster than he could answer them. Board members, advisors, people who had applauded him the night before and now wanted explanations, delivered in carefully worded statements. One text stood out. "We need to talk. This doesn't align with our values." He deleted it, then stopped, retrieved it, and read it again. At the school, whispers replaced greetings. Parents checked their phones between conversations. A woman who had once praised Braden's dedication leaned toward another and said quietly, "I didn't expect that." By noon, 2 sponsors requested meetings. By afternoon, one cancelled outright. Calla spent the same hours in stillness. When her phone finally rang, she answered on the 3rd ring. Yes? A pause. I understand. Another pause. No, I won't be making a statement. She ended the call and returned to what she was doing, unmoved by the urgency on the other end. The contrast sharpened as the day wore on. Braden issued clarifications, then denials, then a carefully framed message about privacy and misunderstanding. Each attempt landed weaker than the last, weighed down by the memory of a woman who hadn't raised her voice once. Silence, Calla knew, doesn't fade. It spreads. By the second day, Braden stopped pretending this would pass quietly. He booked interviews, short ones at first, then longer slots when the first attempts failed to steady the narrative. He rehearsed phrases in front of mirrors and advisors. Context matters. There are two sides. Private matters were made public. Say you're disappointed, one consultant urged over speakerphone. Not defensive. Reflective. I am disappointed, Braden snapped. I'm furious. That doesn't translate well, the consultant replied. You need calm. Calm had never been his skill. He released a statement by evening. Carefully worded. Passive. Full of distance. It spoke of stress, of misunderstanding, of a marriage facing challenges like any other. It never mentioned the hospital, never mentioned the child. The response was immediate and unforgiving. That's not what she said. Where's the denial? Why won't he address the facts? Meanwhile, Calla remained unreachable by design. She declined requests without explanation. When asked for comment, her assistant replied simply, "She has nothing to add." Friends texted, checking in. She thanked them briefly, then returned to her day. That restraint unsettled people more than any rebuttal could have. At the firm, Braden's calendar emptied. Meetings were postponed until further notice. A partner he'd known for years closed his office door and said, quietly, "This complicates things." "It's personal," Braden argued. "It shouldn't affect." "It already has," the man replied. The mistress, his so-called family friend, locked her social media accounts and disappeared from public view. Her once polished page now led to a 404 error. By the end of the week, 3 board seats were under review. Not removed. Not yet. Just questioned. The kind of pause that signals a shift no one wants to name too early. Braden sent Calla a message late that night. "We need to talk. You didn't have to do it like that." She read it once. Then she placed the phone face down and went to sleep. She understood something he didn't. Scrambling makes noise. Noise invites scrutiny. Silence, held long enough, lets the truth stand untouched. And while Braden tried to outrun the moment she created, Calla let it move exactly as it needed to, without interference. The paperwork began quietly, without ceremony or raised voices. Calla's attorney, Marianne Holt, a family law specialist with a reputation for precision, spread the documents across the conference table one morning, each folder labeled, indexed and dated. No commentary, no speculation, just facts arranged so they could speak for themselves. "This," Marianne said calmly, tapping the first file, "is why preparation matters. Bank statements, travel records, expense reimbursements that didn't align with stated destinations, property documents filed under shell entities. Each item alone was unremarkable. Together, they formed a pattern no explanation could smooth over." Calla listened without interruption. "Emotion had its place," Marianne explained, "but not here. Courts don't weigh pain the way people do. They weigh consistency, timelines, proof that holds its shape under questioning." "They'll try to provoke you," Marianne added. "They'll want a reaction. Don't give them one." Calla nodded. "I won't." Across the city, Braden's legal team took a different approach. They prepared narratives instead of files, character statements, descriptions of stress, references to misunderstanding and miscommunication. In court, those things mattered far less than Braden expected. When proceedings began, Calla spoke only when asked. Her answers were brief, accurate, unemotional. Each document presented carried weight because it didn't ask the judge to feel anything, only to see clearly. Evidence doesn't argue. It doesn't persuade loudly. It simply remains. And in that room, where tone and charm had no advantage, Callah's quiet preparation began to do exactly what it was meant to do. The judge entered without ceremony, expression unreadable, movements efficient. No glance lingered. No reaction betrayed opinion. From the bench, this was not a story. It was a case. Callah noticed the stillness immediately. This wasn't a room where charm mattered. It wasn't a place for speeches or remorse shaped for an audience. The judge listened the way someone listens when they have no interest in being moved, only informed. Braden's attorney spoke first, framing the marriage as strained, describing Callah as distant, controlled, difficult to read. The implication hovered: instability without evidence, suggestion without support. The judge didn't interrupt. Then Marianne stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't editorialize. She walked the court through dates, numbers, records that lined up cleanly without explanation. She handed documents forward one by one, allowing the judge to review them in silence. At one point, the judge looked up. "These transfers," she said evenly, "were not disclosed?" "No, Your Honor," Marianne replied. "They were not." The judge nodded once and returned to the file. That was it. No visible reaction. No commentary. Neutrality isn't coldness. It's discipline. And in that discipline, emotional performance falls flat. Braden shifted in his seat, frustration creeping into his posture. The calm he relied on outside the courtroom didn't translate here. Callah remained still, hands folded, eyes forward. She didn't need affirmation. Neutrality was enough, because neutrality meant the facts were being heard without distortion. And facts, once entered into record, don't disappear. The ruling didn't arrive with drama. It arrived with consequences. Custody arrangements were settled cleanly. Financial divisions followed the paper trail, not persuasion. The judge spoke briefly, decisively, then moved on to the next matter on the docket. For the court, this case ended there. For Braden, it didn't. Within weeks, the implications reached beyond the marriage. Board seats are built on trust, and trust depends on stability. Once that stability is questioned, support thins quickly, quietly but thoroughly. One seat went first, framed as a temporary step aside. Another followed, described as under review. By the third, no explanation was offered at all. Braden learned the cost in rooms he no longer entered. Invitations stopped arriving. Meetings he once chaired were reassigned. Conversations shifted tone when he walked in, shorter, guarded, professional without warmth. Influence doesn't disappear overnight. It recedes, slowly, until absence feels natural. "This isn't permanent," he told his advisor once, gripping the edge of the desk. The advisor hesitated. It might be. Callah watched none of this directly. She learned of it the way people learn of weather, through updates, not impact. Her concern wasn't his career, it was her future. Board seats aren't just titles, they are access, leverage, the ability to shape outcomes quietly. Losing them didn't humiliate Braden, it diminished him. And in the end, that loss carried more weight than any public moment ever could. The weeks after the ruling moved differently, not faster, not slower, simply lighter. Callah returned to mornings that belonged to her again. Windows open, quiet air moving through rooms, no longer arranged around someone else's schedule. She took her coffee outside, sitting where the city softened into background, sound, traffic distant, voices indistinct, life continuing without commentary. There were no urgent calls now, no documents waiting for signatures. The lists had done their work. The courtroom had closed its doors. What remained was space. She noticed small things she'd once rushed past, the way sunlight shifted across the table by late morning, the steadiness of her own breath when no one was watching. Peace didn't arrive with celebration. It settled in gradually, like certainty. A message came from Eli, simple, affectionate, unchanged. "Proud of you, Mom." She smiled and typed back, "Always here." That was the difference now. Her days no longer responded to pressure. They followed intention. Peace wasn't the absence of memory. It was the presence of choice. She could think without guarding herself, move without calculating optics. Calla stood, rinsed her mug, and stepped back into the room, unburdened, unobserved, entirely her own. The bookstore cafe was quiet in the way places become when they're meant for lingering. Soft voices, pages turning, a line of afternoon light resting across the floor without urgency. Calla chose a table near the window and set her book down unopened. She wasn't there to disappear into words today. She was there to sit with herself, to let time pass without agenda. That seat taken? She looked up. The man standing there held a coffee in one hand, paint marks faint but unmistakable on his wrist. His posture was easy, unassuming. He waited without expectation. "No," she said. "It isn't." "I'm Dane," he added as he sat. "I've seen you here a few times. Always wondered what you were reading." She smiled. "Sometimes I don't read at all." He laughed quietly. "Those are usually the best visits." They spoke without filling space unnecessarily, about work, about why he painted instead of chasing galleries, about why she wrote instead of consulting full time now. There was no urgency in the exchange, no need to impress. Dane didn't ask about her past, didn't probe or offer understanding he hadn't earned. He didn't arrive as an answer to anything. He was simply present, and Calla realized that was the difference. She didn't need saving. She didn't need reassurance. What she allowed now had to fit into a life already standing whole, balanced, chosen. He glanced at her notebook. "You're the one who wrote that piece, right? Resilience doesn't have to roar." She blinked, then smiled, a little more deeply this time. "I did." He paused, then half grinned. "So, should I call you Calla Crest?" She shook her head gently. "Nah, just Calla." When he asked, "Mind if I join you again sometime?" she answered without hesitation. "I'd like that." Later, walking home, Calla moved at her own pace. No phone pressed to her ear, no schedule tightening the hours ahead, just the quiet assurance that the next step belonged to her because she chose it. She thought about how often women are praised for endurance, for staying, for making things work at personal cost. How rarely they're celebrated for leaving well, for choosing clarity over comfort, for deciding that peace is not something to be earned through suffering, but something to be claimed through intention. Braden's name no longer carried weight in her mind. Not anger, not bitterness, just distance. A chapter closed without the need to revisit its pages. What mattered now was agency. Calla had chosen silence when noise would have weakened her, chosen patience when haste would have cost her leverage, chosen truth in a room built for appearances, and finally she chose herself, without apology, without spectacle. That was the real ending, not the gala, not the courtroom, not the fallout. The ending was this: a woman standing inside her own life, aware of its shape, free to invite others in or walk forward alone. Calla didn't rebuild because something broke her. She rebuilt because she could. And this time, every step forward was hers, by design, by choice, by calm certainty. She no longer carried the crest. She didn't need it to stand tall. Calla never raised her voice. She raised the bar. She didn't destroy his life with rage. She let the truth do the talking. And when her billionaire husband couldn't explain what she already knew, she didn't plead. She didn't perform. She left him standing in his own silence. Because some women don't scream. They don't throw plates. They don't fight to be believed. They smile, walk away, and rebuild an empire without you.